The massive Zephyrian warship hung in Earth's orbit like a predator sizing up its prey. Inside the command bridge, Ambassador Crixtall adjusted his ceremonial robes and let out what passed for laughter among his species. A sound like grinding metal mixed with static. "Look at them," he said to his aide, gesturing at the blue planet below with one of his 4 arms. "They still use chemical propulsion for their spacecraft. How primitive." His aide, a younger Zephyrian named Vextor, nodded eagerly. "The Empire's database shows they've barely left their own solar system. They call themselves humanity. But they're nothing more than hairless apes playing with fire." The Zephyrian Empire had ruled over 300 star systems for millennia. Their technology could bend space itself. Their weapons could destroy entire moons. And their soldiers were enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them nearly invincible. When their scouts had discovered Earth 6 months ago, they'd laughed at what they found. A species that still fought wars among themselves, that still burned fossil fuels, that had only recently figured out how to split atoms. "The Emperor wants this meeting to be quick," Crixtall said, checking his neural implant for the time. "We'll give them the standard offer. Submit to the Empire or face extinction. Based on their primitive technology, I estimate they'll surrender within minutes." The shuttle carrying the human diplomatic team was approaching. Crixtall watched it with amusement. The craft was so basic, so crude compared to Zephyrian technology. It needed rocket boosters just to escape Earth's gravity. "Pathetic, sir," Vextor said, reading from his holographic display. "The humans are sending a small delegation. 3 diplomats and 1 military advisor." "Military advisor?" Crixtall scoffed. What could their military possibly advise about? How to throw stones more accurately? The docking bay pressurized as the human shuttle entered. Crixtall straightened his massive frame. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his scaled skin shifting colors with his mood. Currently, it showed purple and gold, the colors of contempt and superiority. The airlock hissed open, and 4 humans stepped out. 3 wore formal suits, but the 4th was different. He wore military fatigues with various patches and insignia. Crixtall's translator identified him as Commander Jake Sullivan, United States Navy SEALs. Jake Sullivan stood just over 6 feet tall, which made him look almost childlike next to the towering Zephyrians. His face was weathered, with scars that told stories of battles fought in places most people couldn't pronounce. His eyes were calm, calculating, taking in every detail of the alien ship's interior. "Welcome aboard the Dominator," Crixtall said, not bothering to hide his condescension. "I am Ambassador Crixtall of the Zephyrian Empire. I assume you're here to discuss the terms of your surrender?" The lead human diplomat, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, stepped forward. "We're here to open a dialogue between our peoples. Humanity is always interested in peaceful—" "Peace?" Crixtall interrupted, his scales shifting to deep red, the color of amusement. "You misunderstand your position, primitive. The Empire doesn't negotiate with inferior species. We offer you 2 choices. Submit and serve the Empire, or resist and be destroyed." Jake Sullivan hadn't moved since entering the room, but his eyes never stopped scanning. He noticed things the Zephyrians had overlooked: the patrol patterns of the guards, the location of emergency exits, the fact that the aliens relied heavily on their technology and seemed physically slower than their size suggested. "You find our offer amusing, soldier?" Vextor asked, noticing Jake's slight smile. "No, sir," Jake replied calmly. "Just thinking." "Thinking?" Crixtall leaned down, bringing his face closer to Jake's level. "And what could a primitive soldier possibly be thinking about?" "Oh, just wondering something," Jake said. "Your species, you've been spacefaring for how long? Thousands of years?" 10,000 years, Crixtall said proudly. "We had conquered star systems while your ancestors were still living in caves." "That's impressive," Jake nodded. "So in all that time, with all that technology, you've probably never had to fight without it, have you?" The question seemed to confuse Crixtall. "Fight without our technology? Why would we do something so foolish?" "No reason," Jake shrugged. Just curious. Dr. Chen tried to steer the conversation back to diplomacy. Ambassador Krixtall, surely there's room for discussion. Humanity has much to offer. You have nothing, Krixtall roared, his scales flashing bright orange, the color of rage. Your weapons are projectile-based toys. Your ships can barely achieve faster than light travel. Your bodies are weak, requiring constant food and water. You don't even have basic neural implants. He activated a holographic display showing Earth surrounded by Zephyrian warships. 100 dreadnoughts are positioned around your world. Each one carries enough firepower to crack your planet's crust. You have one rotation of your world to decide, serve, or die. The other human diplomats looked shaken, but Jake Sullivan remained calm. He'd faced death before, in Afghanistan, mountains, and Syrian deserts, in submarine operations deep beneath Arctic ice. This was just another mission. May I ask a question? Jake said. Krixtall waved dismissively with two of his arms. Speak, primitive. Your empire controls 300 systems, right? That's a lot of territory to defend. How many soldiers do you have? We have 10 billion warriors across the empire, Vextor answered proudly. Each one enhanced with our technology, worth 100 of any primitive species. 10 billion. Jake repeated thoughtfully. Spread across 300 systems. That's about 33 million per system. Earth has 8 billion people. If even 10% of us fought back, that's 800 million. We'd outnumber you 24-1 on our planet alone. Krixtall laughed again, that grinding metallic sound. Numbers mean nothing when we can destroy your cities from orbit. What good are your 800 million when one of our warriors in power armor can eliminate thousands? You're absolutely right, Jake agreed. In a stand-up fight with your technology, we'd lose. But here's the thing about humans. We don't always fight fair. Something in Jake's tone made Vextor step back slightly. There was no fear in the human's voice, no desperation, just calm certainty. You threaten us? Krixtall asked, his scales shifting to black, the color of killing intent. No threats, Jake said. Just observations. You see, you've been traveling the stars for 10,000 years. You've forgotten what it's like to be desperate, to be the underdog. But humans? We've been fighting each other with sticks and stones. Then swords, then guns, then bombs. We've gotten very, very good at war. He paused, letting his words sink in. You know what the difference is between your warriors and a Navy SEAL? Krixtall didn't answer, so Jake continued. Your warriors are enhanced by technology. Take that away. And what are they? But a SEAL? We're trained to be weapons. Our bodies, our minds, everything is focused on one goal, completing the mission, no matter the cost. Enough of this posturing, Krixtall snarled. You have 24 hours. Surrender or die. As the humans were escorted back to their shuttle, Jake memorized every detail he could. The layout of the ship, the number of guards, the way they moved. His trained mind was already formulating plans, calculating odds, identifying weaknesses. Back on Earth, Jake was immediately brought to an emergency meeting of world leaders. The conference room was chaos. Presidents and prime ministers arguing about whether to surrender or fight. The odds seemed impossible. The Zephyrian technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. We have to surrender, the president of the European Union was saying. They'll destroy us all if we resist. Surrender means slavery, the Chinese premier countered. For all of humanity, forever. Jake stood at the back of the room thinking. Then he stepped forward. There's a third option. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the SEAL commander. What third option? The American president asked. We make them think we're surrendering, Jake said. But we use that time to learn everything we can about them. Their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. Then we hit them where they don't expect it. That's insane, someone shouted. They have energy shields, plasma weapons, faster than light travel. They also have 10,000 years of arrogance, Jake replied. They see us as primitives. They won't expect us to adapt, to learn, to find ways around their advantages. Every empire in history has fallen because they underestimated their enemies. The debate raged for hours, but eventually, a consensus emerged. Earth would appear to surrender while secretly preparing for the most unconventional war in human history. And Jake Sullivan would lead a special unit tasked with learning everything possible about their new overlords. As Jake left the meeting, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, fell into step beside him. "Think we have a chance, Commander?" Jake thought about the Zephyrians, their advanced technology, their massive ships, their enhanced warriors. Then he thought about human history. Every time the odds seemed impossible, every time a smaller force defeated a larger one through determination, cunning, and sacrifice. "They've got the technology," he said, "but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" "We've got nothing to lose," Jake replied. "And that makes us dangerous." Over the next 24 hours, Earth prepared its response. To the Zephyrians watching from orbit, it looked like humanity was preparing to surrender. Governments were coordinating, messages of peace were being broadcast, weapons were being supposedly decommissioned. But in secret military facilities around the world, a different preparation was underway. Scientists studied every piece of data from the brief meeting on the Zephyrian ship. Military strategists developed unconventional tactics, and Jake Sullivan handpicked a team of the best special forces operators from around the world. The team included Rodriguez, an expert in infiltration and explosives; Alexei Volkov, a Russian Spetsnaz operator who could kill silently with anything from a paperclip to a power cable; Chen Wei, a Chinese special forces soldier who specialized in electronic warfare; Sarah Williams, a British SAS sniper who never missed; and dozens more. The deadliest humans on the planet. "Listen up," Jake addressed his team in a hidden bunker beneath Cheyenne Mountain. "In 12 hours, we're going to tell the Zephyrians we surrender. They'll probably put us under occupation. Maybe take some humans as slaves or workers. Our job is simple: learn everything about them, how they fight, how they think, how their technology works. Then, when the time is right, we show them why humans have survived everything Earth could throw at us." "What's our endgame, Commander?" Volkov asked in accented English. "We make them regret ever finding Earth," Jake replied. As the deadline approached, Jake stood on the bunker's observation deck, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, the Zephyrians waited, confident in their superiority. They had no idea what they had awakened. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 300 systems. They had technology that seemed like magic. They had warriors enhanced beyond human capability. But they had never faced a species that had spent its entire existence perfecting the art of war against itself. They had never faced humans backed into a corner with everything to lose. And they had certainly never faced a Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The countdown to Earth's response ticked away. In homes around the world, parents hugged their children, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Soldiers checked their weapons, knowing they might be useless against energy shields. Scientists worked frantically, trying to find any weakness in what they'd learned about Zephyrian technology. But Jake Sullivan stood calm in the storm, his mind already 5 steps ahead. The Zephyrians wanted submission. They expected fear. They counted on their technological superiority to cow humanity into servitude. They were about to learn why humans had a saying: "The most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose." As the final hour approached, Jake received word that he would be part of the delegation delivering Earth's surrender. It was exactly what he'd hoped for: another chance to observe the enemy up close, to learn their weaknesses, to begin the long game that would determine humanity's fate. The shuttle prepared to launch, carrying Earth's official response. To the Zephyrians, it would look like victory, another primitive species added to their empire. They would mock humanity's weakness, laugh at their primitive technology, and bask in their superiority. But Jake knew something they didn't. Every empire throughout history had thought itself invincible. Every conqueror had believed their victory complete, and every single one had fallen to those they'd underestimated. As the shuttle lifted off, Jake allowed himself a small smile. The Zephyrians thought this was the end of humanity's story. In reality, it was just the beginning. The occupation began exactly as the Zephyrians had planned. Their warriors descended to Earth in gleaming dropships, establishing control centers in major cities. Humans were ordered to register with their new overlords, to be cataloged and assigned roles in service to the Empire. Most went quietly, fearfully, hoping compliance would mean survival. Jake Sullivan stood in the processing line in what used to be New York City, now renamed Sector 7 Alpha by the Zephyrians. He watched everything with the trained eye of a predator studying prey. The aliens were efficient but predictable, following protocols that hadn't changed in centuries. "Next," barked a Zephyrian guard, his power armor humming with energy. Jake stepped forward, playing the part of a defeated soldier. The scanner passed over him, cataloging his biometrics. Military background detected. The guard noted with what passed for a sneer among his species. "You will be assigned to manual labor. Your primitive combat skills are useless now." "Yes, sir," Jake replied meekly, while memorizing the scanner's frequency patterns. Every piece of technology had weaknesses. Rodriguez, stationed 3 blocks away with concealed monitoring equipment, was recording everything. The Zephyrians had made their first mistake. They'd allowed humans to keep their personal communication devices, considering them too primitive to pose any threat. What they didn't know was that Earth's best hackers and engineers had spent the 24-hour deadline creating new encryption methods, new ways to hide data in seemingly harmless transmissions. Over the following weeks, Jake and his team were scattered across different occupied zones, each gathering intelligence. The Zephyrians' arrogance made them careless. They spoke freely around humans, assuming the primitives couldn't understand their technology or plans. Chen Wei, assigned to maintenance in a Zephyrian command center, discovered something crucial: the aliens' neural implants, which they relied on for everything from communication to controlling their technology, operated on a specific frequency. More importantly, they had no manual overrides. The Zephyrians had become so dependent on their tech that they'd forgotten how to function without it. Sarah Williams, working in a supply depot, noticed that Zephyrian power armor had exhaust vents that opened every 30 seconds to prevent overheating, a vulnerability that could be exploited with the right timing and the right weapon. Volkov, laboring in a mining operation, observed that Zephyrian warriors, despite their strength, moved slowly in Earth's gravity. Their home world had lighter gravity, and while their power armor compensated, it made them sluggish in hand-to-hand combat without it. But the most important discovery came from Jake himself. Assigned to cleaning a Zephyrian barracks, he overheard 2 warriors complaining about the Empire's stretched resources. 300 systems were too many to control effectively. Rebellions on other worlds were draining their military, and Earth's occupation force was smaller than optimal, only about 1 million warriors for the entire planet. The information flowed through hidden networks, compiled and analyzed by resistance cells forming in every occupied zone. Scientists worked in secret labs, developing weapons based on the intelligence gathered. Military strategists planned operations that would exploit every weakness discovered. 3 months into the occupation, Jake received a coded message. It was time for the first test. The target was a Zephyrian supply convoy moving through the ruins of Denver. 12 transport vehicles carrying weapons and equipment, escorted by 50 warriors in power armor. By conventional military standards, it was suicide to attack such a force with small arms and improvised weapons, but humans hadn't survived by being conventional. Jake's team took position in the rubble of collapsed buildings. They'd spent weeks preparing this ambush, studying Zephyrian patrol patterns, identifying blind spots in their sensors, crafting weapons from salvaged materials. "Remember," Jake whispered into his comm, "we're not trying to win a battle. We're sending a message." The convoy approached, exactly on schedule. Zephyrians were creatures of routine. Another weakness. As the lead vehicle passed the designated point, Rodriguez triggered the first surprise, not an explosive, but an electromagnetic pulse generated from stripped microwave ovens and car batteries. The effect was immediate. The Zephyrian warriors stumbled as their neural implants flickered. Their power armor seized up as systems rebooted. For exactly 7 seconds, they were vulnerable. 7 seconds was all Jake's team needed. They struck from the shadows with brutal efficiency. Not with guns, which the armor could deflect, but with improvised weapons targeting the exhaust vents Sarah had identified. Thermite paste, created from aluminum powder and rust, poured into the vents. The armor that made them invincible became an oven. Jake himself took down 3 warriors with a modified construction nail gun. The projectiles timed perfectly to strike during the brief moment the vents opened. The Zephyrians, so dependent on their technology, didn't know how to react when it failed them. In 90 seconds, it was over. 50 Zephyrian warriors lay dead or dying, their million-credit power armor reduced to expensive coffins. The convoy's cargo was already being hauled away by resistance fighters who melted back into the ruins. The psychological impact was greater than the physical damage. For the first time in 10,000 years, Zephyrian warriors had been defeated by a primitive species. The footage, captured by hidden cameras and broadcast through underground networks, showed the galaxy that the Empire could bleed. Ambassador Krixtal received the news in his orbital command ship. His scales cycled through colors so quickly his aide grew dizzy watching purple rage, black hatred, yellow confusion. Impossible, he snarled. 50 warriors killed by primitives? The reports must be wrong, but the evidence was undeniable. The video showed humans moving with lethal precision, exploiting weaknesses that no Zephyrian had imagined existed. Worse, analysis showed the humans had used the Empire's own technology against them. The electromagnetic pulse was based on Zephyrian designs, simplified and weaponized. They're learning, Vextor said quietly, fear creeping into his voice for the first time. Double the patrols, Krixtal ordered. Increase surveillance. Find these terrorists and make examples of them. But finding shadows in a world of 8 billion humans proved impossible. Every crackdown created more resistance. Every Zephyrian atrocity was met with human innovation. They poisoned water supplies to warrior barracks with chemicals that reacted with alien biochemistry. They hacked transportation systems to send supply ships into the sun. They turned the Empire's own bureaucracy against them, filing millions of false reports that clogged their data systems. Jake became a ghost story among the Zephyrians. The human who could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish without a trace. They called him Shadow Walker in their language, and warriors would nervously check their surroundings when assigned to Earth duty. 6 months into the occupation, Jake sat in a hidden bunker studying intelligence reports. The resistance had grown from hundreds to millions. Every successful operation inspired 10 more. Humans had reverse-engineered captured Zephyrian technology, creating hybrid weapons that combined alien power sources with human ingenuity. We're not just fighting them, Rodriguez observed, cleaning her rifle, now modified with Zephyrian energy cells. We're becoming something they never expected. She was right. Humans were adapting at a rate that terrified the Empire. What had taken other species centuries to learn, humans mastered in months. Not because they were smarter, but because they were desperate. And desperation, Jake knew, was the greatest teacher. The real blow came when other occupied worlds took notice. Species that had submitted to the Empire for millennia saw the broadcasts from Earth. They saw a technologically inferior race standing up to their oppressors and winning. Rebellions sparked across the galaxy. Inspired by humanity's example, Krixtal stood before the Imperial Council, trying to explain how a simple occupation had turned into a galactic crisis. The humans are unlike any species we've encountered, he reported. They don't just resist, they evolve. Every tactic we employ, they counter. Every weakness they find, they exploit. They've turned warfare into art. The Emperor himself, a being so ancient he remembered when the Empire was just a single world, considered this information. Perhaps we underestimated them, the Emperor mused. Send the Imperial Guard. Crush this rebellion before it spreads further. The Imperial Guard were the elite of the elite, 100,000 warriors equipped with the best technology the Empire possessed. They had never failed to pacify a world, but they had never faced humans who had nothing to lose. Jake received intelligence about the incoming force and called a meeting of resistance leaders from around the world. The bunker was crowded with former soldiers, scientists, engineers, and ordinary people who had become extraordinary through necessity. "They're sending their best," Jake announced. "The Imperial Guard will arrive in 2 weeks. If we face them head-on, we lose." "So what do we do?" asked Colonel Chen, formerly of the People's Liberation Army. Jake smiled, and several people unconsciously stepped back. They'd learned that when Commander Sullivan smiled like that, something devastating was about to happen to the enemy. "We don't face them at all," Jake said. "We let them land, we let them deploy, and then we show them why humans wrote the book on asymmetric warfare." The plan was audacious, requiring coordination between millions of resistance fighters across the globe. It relied on the Zephyrians' greatest weakness, their absolute faith in their technological superiority. As the Imperial Guard's fleet approached Earth, they detected no military buildup, no massing of forces. The planet seemed quiet, subdued. They took it as a sign that the humans had finally learned their place. They were wrong. The first shuttles of Imperial Guard touched down in major cities around the world. Their warriors, resplendent in golden armor that could withstand nuclear blasts, marched out expecting to find cowering humans. Instead, they found empty streets. Every major city had been evacuated in secret. Populations moved through underground networks that the Zephyrian sensors couldn't penetrate. The warriors moved through ghost towns, their advanced sensors detecting no life signs. Then Jake's voice echoed from speakers hidden throughout the cities. "Welcome to Earth," he said calmly. "You came here expecting to find primitives. Instead, you found a species that has been perfecting the art of war for its entire existence. Your technology is superior. Your weapons are more advanced. But you forgot one thing. This is our world. We know every street, every building, every hiding place. And we've had 6 months to prepare." The Imperial Guard commanders scoffed. What could humans do against warriors in armor that could survive direct hits from their own plasma weapons? They got their answer 60 seconds later. In New York, 10,000 tons of explosives detonated in the subway tunnels, dropping entire city blocks into sinkholes that swallowed hundreds of warriors. In London, the Thames had been diverted through months of secret construction, and millions of gallons of water mixed with industrial chemicals flooded the streets where the guards stood. In Tokyo, electromagnetic generators hidden in buildings created a field that didn't just disable their equipment. It turned their neural implants into receivers for a frequency that caused excruciating pain. But the masterpiece was in Moscow. Jake himself led this operation, having spent weeks preparing. As 1,000 Imperial Guard warriors advanced through Red Square, the ground beneath them liquefied. Not from explosives, but from a chemical reaction that turned the permafrost into quicksand. Their heavy armor, designed to protect them, became anchors, dragging them down. Jake stood on a rooftop, watching through binoculars as the elite warriors of the Empire struggled helplessly. Some managed to activate their armor's flight systems, only to be brought down by cables fired from modified harpoon guns. Others tried to call for evacuation, but their communications were jammed by signals broadcast from their own captured equipment. "Sir," Rodriguez reported over comm, "operations successful in all sectors. Enemy forces neutralized." Neutralized, not destroyed. That would come later. First, Jake wanted them to understand fear, to feel what every species under their rule had felt for millennia. The Emperor watched the footage in stunned silence. His Imperial Guard, the force that had never known defeat, was being systematically taken apart by a species that still used chemical propulsion. Warriors who could conquer worlds were drowning in chemically altered water, suffocating in their own armor, screaming as their neural implants turned against them. "How?" was all he could say. His advisors had no answer. How could they explain that humans had spent their entire existence finding creative ways to kill each other? that every atrocity in human history had taught them new methods of warfare, that a species that could split atoms could also split the atom of their enemy's confidence? But the true horror for the Empire was yet to come. The captured Imperial Guard warriors were not executed. Instead, they were stripped of their armor and weapons, given basic clothing, and forced to experience life as humans under occupation. They worked in farms, factories, mines, all the places where humans had labored for the Empire. And Jake made sure every moment was broadcast across the galaxy. The mighty Imperial Guard reduced to manual laborers, dependent on the mercy of the primitives they had come to crush. The psychological warfare was devastating. Across 300 systems, species saw that the Empire's greatest warriors could be defeated, humiliated, brought low. The rebellions that had been sparks became infernos. In his bunker, Jake studied galactic maps showing the spreading rebellion. What had started as Earth's fight for survival had become something larger, a revolution that threatened to topple an empire that had stood for 10 millennia. "Think we lit too big a fire?" Rodriguez asked, standing beside him. "No such thing," Jake replied. "The Empire made the same mistake every bully makes. They pushed until they found someone who could push back harder. 6 months later, Earth had become a fortress. Captured Zephyrian technology had been studied, improved, and mass-produced. Humans had built their own energy weapons, their own shields, their own space-capable fighters. But more importantly, they'd shared this knowledge with every rebel world. The Empire tried desperately to regain control. They sent fleet after fleet, each one falling to human creativity and alien desperation. Trojans hidden in supply shipments, viruses that turned their own ships against them. Suicide runs by pilots who had nothing left to lose. Jake stood on the bridge of humanity's first true warship, a hybrid of human engineering and alien technology that shouldn't have worked but did, because humans had never heard that it was impossible. Around him, crew from a dozen species worked together, united by a common cause. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian homeworld. It's the Emperor himself." Jake nodded. He'd been expecting this. The Emperor's image appeared on the main screen. For the first time in recorded history, the immortal ruler of 300 systems looked tired. "Commander Sullivan," the Emperor began, "I would speak with you." "I'm listening," Jake replied. "This war has cost both our peoples dearly. I propose a ceasefire, a chance to negotiate." "No," Jake interrupted. "You had your chance to negotiate. You chose to mock us instead." The Emperor's composure cracked slightly. "You cannot hope to destroy the Empire. We have resources you cannot imagine." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But we have something you don't. Nothing to lose and everything to gain. Every ship you send, we capture or destroy. Every warrior you deploy, we turn to our cause. Your empire is bleeding out, and we're the wound that won't close." "What do you want?" the Emperor asked finally. Jake looked around the bridge at humans and aliens working side by side, at Rodriguez, grinning fiercely, at Chen Wei, fingers dancing over tactical displays, at all the beings who had learned that together, they were stronger than any empire. "Simple," Jake said. "We want what every species wants, freedom. The empire ends. Every world governs itself. And if anyone, anywhere, tries to build another empire on the backs of others." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Well, they'll learn what the Zephyrians learned, that humans are very, very good at war, and we're even better at teaching others." The transmission ended, and Jake turned to his crew. The war wasn't over. It might take years to fully dismantle the Empire's hold on the galaxy. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled for 10,000 years. They had conquered 300 systems. They had technology that defied imagination. But they had made one fatal error. They had mocked humans. And one Navy SEAL had indeed changed everything. The battle for Zephyria Prime began not with massive fleets or apocalyptic weapons, but with a single human walking through the front door. Jake Sullivan stood before the Imperial Palace's gates, wearing no armor, carrying no visible weapons. Behind him, the skies burned with the light of 1,000 ships, human vessels alongside rebel craft from every corner of the former empire. But Jake had insisted on trying diplomacy one last time. The palace guards, warriors who had once stood proudly in their powered armor, now looked uncertain. 3 years of war had changed everything. The empire that had seemed invincible was down to its last dozen systems. The rest had either fallen to the coalition or declared independence. "I request an audience with the Emperor," Jake said calmly. The guards exchanged glances. They knew who this human was, the Shadow Walker, the breaker of empires, the one who had started it all. They also knew their plasma rifles were powered by technology that humans had learned to counter, wearing armor that humans had learned to pierce. They stepped aside. Jake walked through corridors that had stood for millennia, past treasures looted from 1,000 worlds, but he noticed something else. Empty pedestals where artifacts had been, blank spaces on walls where trophies once hung. The Empire was already being picked apart from within. The throne room doors opened, and Jake entered to find the Emperor waiting. The ancient being looked smaller than he had in transmissions, his scales dulled with age and stress. "So," the Emperor said, "the primitive comes to gloat." "No," Jake replied. "I came to offer you something your empire never gave others, a choice." The Emperor's laugh was bitter. "What choice could you possibly offer? My fleets are destroyed, my warriors scattered, my subjects in rebellion. You've won, human. Take your vengeance." Jake studied the being who had ruled for so long he'd forgotten what it meant to serve. Vengeance would be executing you, broadcasting it across the galaxy. It's what you would do, but humans. We've learned that breaking the cycle matters more than revenge. He pulled out a data pad and placed it on the floor between them. Your complete surrender. The dissolution of the Empire. War crime trials for those who committed atrocities. In exchange, the Zephyrian people, not the Empire, the people, get to join the Galactic Coalition as equals. No slavery, no subjugation, no revenge. Just a chance to start over. Why? The Emperor's voice held genuine confusion. "We showed you no mercy. We mocked you, enslaved you, tried to destroy you. Because," Jake said, "that's the difference between us. You built an empire on fear, we're building a future on hope." The Emperor stared at the datapad for a long moment. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer as coalition forces entered the capital city. His remaining guards were falling back, overwhelmed not by superior technology but by the sheer determination of free beings fighting for their future. "I've ruled for 15,000 years, the Emperor said quietly. "I've seen species rise and fall, watched civilizations crumble to dust. But I've never seen anything like your kind. You took our greatest strength, our technology, and turned it against us. You united species that had been enemies for millennia. You found hope where there should have been only despair." He reached for the datapad with trembling claws. Perhaps it's time for something new." The signing was broadcast across the galaxy. The immortal Emperor of the Zephyrian Empire formally surrendering to a human soldier wearing combat fatigues. It was an image that would be remembered for millennia, not as a humiliation, but as the moment the galaxy chose a different path. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. 300 systems don't reorganize overnight. There were holdouts, Zephyrian warlords who tried to carve out their own little empires, but they found themselves facing not just humans, but a united coalition of species who had learned humanity's most important lesson. Together, they were unstoppable. Jake found himself in a role he'd never expected, not just a soldier, but a teacher. Species from across the galaxy came to learn from humans, not about technology, but about the art of resistance, the power of unity, the strength found in desperation. The Vulari, a species of artists and philosophers who had been forced to build weapons for the Empire, learned guerrilla tactics to defend their worlds. The Keithan, heavy worlders who had been used as laborers, discovered that their natural strength made them formidable when combined with human combat training. Even the Zephyrians, humbled but not broken, began to adapt to a galaxy where strength came from cooperation rather than domination. 5 years after the war ended, Jake stood in the council chambers of the new galactic coalition. Representatives from over 400 species filled the vast hall, each with an equal voice. It wasn't perfect. Millennia of Empire rule had left deep scars, but it was a beginning. The chair recognizes Commander Sullivan of Earth, the council speaker announced. Jake rose, feeling the weight of history. He was no longer young. The war had aged him, turned his hair gray and added lines to his face. But his eyes still held the same determination that had carried humanity from near slavery to freedom. Fellow beings, he began. 5 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire expected humanity to kneel. They saw our technology and called us primitive. They saw our divisions and called us weak. They saw our compassion and called us foolish. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces both human and alien. They were wrong on every count. Our technology? We made it better by combining it with theirs. Our divisions? They became our strength when we united against a common threat. Our compassion? It's what allows us to sit here as equals instead of continuing an endless cycle of vengeance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jake continued, but we must remember, freedom isn't won once and kept forever. It must be defended, nurtured, chosen every single day. The Empire fell not because of human weapons or tactics, but because beings across the galaxy decided they'd rather die free than live as slaves. He looked directly at the section where the Zephyrian delegation sat. To our former enemies, now our fellow coalition members, you've learned what we knew all along. True strength isn't in dominating others, but in standing beside them. The Zephyrian representative, a young female named Sira Tell who had fought alongside humans in the final battles, stood and bowed. It was a gesture that would have been unthinkable under the Empire. But let me be clear, Jake's voice hardened. If anyone, anywhere, tries to rebuild what we've torn down, if they seek to enslave, to conquer, to rule through fear, they'll find that humans have long memories and longer reaches. We wrote the book on warfare, but we'd rather write a new chapter on peace. The speech ended to thunderous applause from 100 different species. But Jake's work wasn't done. There were still refugee crises to manage, former slave worlds that needed help rebuilding, war criminals to track down. Rodriguez found him later on the observation deck of the Coalition station, looking down at Earth. The planet bore scars from the occupation, cities still being rebuilt, memorials to the billions who had died, but it was free. Hell of a journey from that first meeting on their ship, she said, joining him at the viewport. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd treated us with respect from the beginning, Jake mused. If they'd offered partnership instead of slavery, then the galaxy would still be under their boot, Rodriguez replied. It took humans to show everyone that empires only fall when someone's willing to push them. A young aide approached, a Thraxian, insectoid beings who had been nearly extinct under the Empire but were now thriving. Commander Sullivan, the Council requests your presence. The new defense proposals are ready for review. Jake nodded but didn't move immediately. You know what the ironic part is? He said to Rodriguez. They called us primitive because we still fought among ourselves. But that's exactly why we knew how to fight them. Every war in human history was practice for the big one. And now? Rodriguez asked. Now we teach the galaxy that the best warriors are the ones who know when not to fight, Jake replied. As they walked back to the council chambers, Jake's comm unit chimed. It was a message from Chen Wei, now Earth's military attaché to the coalition. Attached was an image, the first joint training exercise between human marines and Zephyrian warriors, former enemies learning to be allies. The transformation of the galaxy wasn't complete. It might never be truly finished. There were still pirates, still warlords, still those who yearned for the good old days of the Empire. But they faced a galaxy united by more than fear, taught by a species that had mastered both war and peace. In schools across the coalition, children learned about the Great Liberation, how a single meeting between arrogant conquerors and desperate defenders had changed everything. How humanity's greatest weakness, their constant infighting, had become their greatest strength. How one Navy SEAL had looked at impossible odds and decided they weren't impossible after all. But Jake always insisted the story be told correctly. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about humanity alone. It was about what happens when beings decide they've been pushed far enough, when they choose to stand together rather than kneel alone, when they realize that empires built on fear always fall to those who overcome it. 10 years after the war, Jake retired. Not to Earth, but to a colony world where humans and aliens lived side by side. He opened a training center, not for war, but for peace, teaching former soldiers from 100 species how to be teachers, builders, healers. One day, a young Zephyrian approached him. She was barely out of adolescence, born after the Empire fell. "Are you the Shadow Walker?" she asked nervously. Jake smiled. "I was. Now I'm just a teacher." "My grandfather was Imperial Guard," she said. "You captured him in Moscow. He says you spared his life when you could have killed him. Why?" Jake considered the question. Because killing him would have just created another enemy. Sparing him created the possibility of a friend. "Your grandfather now trains coalition peacekeepers, doesn't he?" She nodded. "He says humans taught him that strength without honor is meaningless." "We didn't teach him that," Jake corrected gently. "We just reminded him. Every species knows the difference between right and wrong. Sometimes they just need someone to show them it's possible to choose right, even when it's harder." As the young Zephyrian left, thoughtful, Rodriguez appeared with 2 cups of coffee, real Earth coffee, not the synthetic stuff. "Still teaching the hard lessons?" she asked. "Someone has to," Jake replied. The Empire lasted 10,000 years because everyone thought it was too big to fall. We proved that wrong. But we also proved something more important, that what comes after can be better than what came before. They sat in comfortable silence, watching students of different species training together, a Vulari and a human sparring, laughing when they both ended up on the mat. A Kethan helping a Thraxian with weight training, former enemies becoming friends. "You know they're making a movie about you," Rodriguez mentioned. "The human who broke the Empire," Jake groaned. "Please tell me you're joking." "Nope. They've got that action star playing you. The one with all the muscles and perfect hair. I should sue for defamation," Jake muttered, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. Rodriguez laughed. "Face it, Sullivan. You're going down in history whether you like it or not. The primitive soldier who looked at the greatest empire in galactic history and said, 'Bring it on.'" "That's not what happened and you know it," Jake protested. "I was terrified. We all were. We just didn't let it stop us. And that," Rodriguez said, raising her coffee cup, "is why we won. Not because we weren't afraid, but because we were afraid and fought anyway." As the sun set over the colony world, a sun different from Earth's but no less beautiful, Jake reflected on the journey. From a Navy SEAL on a dying world to a teacher on a thriving colony, from humanity on its knees to humanity among the stars. The Zephyrian Empire had mocked humans. They'd seen primitive technology and assumed primitive minds. They'd seen a divided species and assumed it was weak. They'd seen compassion and assumed it was cowardice. One Navy SEAL had changed everything. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by embodying what made humanity dangerous: adaptability, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy was free because humans had remembered a simple truth, that every empire in history had fallen, and usually to those they'd dismissed as beneath notice. The Zephyrians had joined that list, brought low not by a superior force but by a species that had turned desperation into an art form. And somewhere in the archives of the Galactic Coalition, stored alongside treaties and constitutions, was a simple recording. Ambassador Crixtall's mocking laughter as he dismissed humanity as primitives, followed by Jake Sullivan's calm response. "We've gotten very, very good at war." It served as a reminder to future generations, never mock those who have nothing to lose. Because one of them might just be a Navy SEAL who changes everything.